what is a Death Knight? What level does it start at? It's a hero class, but what does that even mean? What we came to was that the Death Knight as a class, as a hero class, should have a heroic beginning.
We're building a whole starting area for the Death Knight that explains his purpose in the world and sort of where he came from and how he got out from under the Lich King's grasp and really introduce him to the world naturally.
The reason for Death Knights starting in Eastern Plaguelands is tied to their origin, right? Death Knights in the War III era were created by the Undead Scourge, mortal heroes, whether they were knights or paladins. They weren't expressly all paladins. There's some precedent for, non-paladin heroes becoming Death Knights as well. Were kind of lured to darkness, whether they were frustrated or, just kind of lost heart, or whether they were just disenfranchised and wanted power. Whatever the reasons were, a lot of these mighty dudes, wound up signing on with the Scourge. The Lich King granted them, unique weapons and powers to pretty much be his generals.
We're kind of explaining, whatever happened with Tyr's Hand, because there's a lot of story there that we didn't get into quest-wise. And so now we're starting to get back into that and explain how exactly things happened there and how it moved forward.
Right away, they are told, they are shown, they're given the directive, you are evil, you are going to go do evil things. Your master commands Arthas.
Arthas is kind of the, unique example of Death Knights. He was the first. So, he has Frostmourne, set a precedent for the rune weapons for the class. And ultimately, he just kind of, grew darker and darker and graduated, became the first Death Knight. And so I think there are many other mortals that followed in his wake. The quest will illustrate not only, what you can do and what your role is in the world, but it will also begin to tell the story of how you get free. We bring Tyrion Fordring into it and a lot of the badass paladin characters that are still alive in the setting. And they actually, there's an altercation at Light's Hope Chapel.
Big battle, Mograine, the player, Death Knight forces come up. Light's Hope, we have the Argent Dawn that comes up, and then we have a battlefield situation. And out of nowhere, Tyrion Fordring rides up with his knights. And so between Mograine and Tyrion, we have a huge confrontation in the player. And so we start them out in all-out war. But ultimately, there's a reason Light's Hope is where it is, and there's a reason the Scourge has never been able to take it.
And it pretty much tells the story of the birth of this new order, right, called the Knights of the Ebon Blade, and sets up, your new headquarters and why you guys are a new thing in the world, right? Like, you might be dead and, grim, right? But damn it, you're going to take it out on the Lich King, right, for what he's done to you.
When we think of what character classes can be played by which races, we try to think of it as much as possible in terms of allowing as many as possible and then only kind of cutting out choices when we need to.
Gnome Death Knights. In fact, in the Friends and Family Alpha, I made the first Death Knight, and it was a gnome.
Even gnomes. I mean, there's something cool to be said about Gnome Death Knights, sort of the irony almost. Well, the hero class, I'd say, sets up more of its background than affects its long-term gameplay. Ultimately, the Death Knight needs to be balanced against all the other classes that we have in the game. We've very deliberately set it up so that it's not more powerful than other character classes. Otherwise, what we'd see is every kind of veteran player playing a Death Knight.
Kind of the phrase that we've used in terms of the hero classes is epic but equal. So epic in terms of how you obtain them, epic in terms of how they feel, but certainly not more powerful.
One of our goals for the trees is to not have a tanking tree, to have some cool tanking talents in multiple trees so you don't feel pigeonholed. Like, oh, I took the DPS tree, sorry, I can't do your dungeon group, I can't tank for you.
One of the reasons we kind of decided to do that is we feel like tanks are something that players often need. Players are often looking for tanks for an instance or tanks for any kind of a run. And in terms of the specific type of tank, we don't really have a tank that's specialized in spellcasters.
I think when we start stepping on the warlock's toes or the shaman's toes or the warrior's toes, that's when we start to back off and go, well, how is this guy different? What's going to be cool and unique about him?
So Death Knights have a whole lot of kind of class-defining abilities. Not only is their resource mechanic very different and it inherently defines the class in a way that's different than others, they also have some spells that are very mechanically different than other classes. A great example would be the Death Grip that pulls enemies toward you. In addition, we have the ability to raise dead characters. So unlike the Druid's Combat Resurrection, the player that you're animating dead on, that you're raising dead on, is able to actually play as the ghoul. That should be a lot of fun because the ghoul has a host of different abilities. The ghoul can leap, the ghoul can stun, he can do a bleed attack, he can do his normal direct damage attack, he can huddle if he's taking a whole lot of damage to kind of, reduce incoming damage. He can even explode. So once you're kind of done playing the ghoul and you want to go back to getting yourself resurrected, might as well just suicide yourself and blow up and send ghoul parts flying everywhere.
The thing I'm really interested in is the Death Knight. I can't wait to play that.
The Death Knight.
Death Knight.
The Death Knight.
Death Knight.
I really want to play the Death Knight.
We've been looking forward to getting to Northrend ever since we were making the original game. When we made Outland, which was something that we were equally excited about, we were kind of testing the boundaries of, just how far can we push things conceptually. And I think, Adreni flying a spaceship and crashing it down onto Azeroth was probably as far as we can push it for the time being.
There's something really cool about Lich King now where we're getting back to terrestrial Azeroth, and there's normal trees and mountains and snow and, things that are much more familiar to most players, right, in terms of, pop fantasy or, even the Warcraft they've known.
Our goal for Northrend was to make sure that it wasn't one massive white continent of snow. We really think that change up is important for players. It feels like a big reward when you get to change environments.
And I think that we struck a pretty good balance where as you progressed north throughout the continent, it got colder and snowier. And by the time you actually hit the two northernmost zones, Ice Crown and Storm Peaks, we just blast you with the stuff, and it's really icy, and you're up really high, and there's snow and wind and, evil everywhere.
As you're leveling up in this expansion, you constantly have the choice of I'm not just gelling with this area. I think I'll go to Borean Tundra instead of Howling Fjord, or I'll go to Grizzly Hills instead of Dragonblight. There's a lot of choice that players can make.
Working with concepts is very important. Our game is very painterly looking anyway. So when we start with a painting, well, that's the best place to start. We know that's what we want it to look like. And what we can get from a concept piece is our colors. We can color pick our fog, our ground, our trees. You have to have some kind of image in your head and with the colors and everything else on paper so you can duplicate this zone.
It's an interesting way to work. Working with something that's been established like that, especially from a lore perspective, there's so much that we really have to make sure that we're staying true to.
We always take into consideration, how is the player going to first see this place? Where are they going to step? How are they going to feel when they first see something new?
When you're working with a 2D concept for an environment, you're not taking into account the space or how far those mountains actually are, and so it's easy to shade them light purple in your concept, but then when you get your fog color into the environment and it's interacting with the texture color on the mountainside, you always have that kind of that shift that happens where it's okay, it's not going to be exactly like the concept, but it's actually cooler because we can do this other thing, or we can push the fog out this distance to try to match that as much as possible. So really it's just, I think that's where being a 3D artist comes into play, where you have that knowledge of, okay, we know what we're shooting for, but there's all these tricks that we can use to get to that.
And there's 6 people working on different things. There's one guy making a tree, another guy making a rock, another guy making a tile set, lighting, somebody making the watercolor. All of that has to look like it's cohesive in one zone, one kind of color scheme throughout, and the concept is going to be the thing, the anchor that everyone's going to come back to.
Moving Dalaran to Northrend popped pretty quickly, and it just felt immediately that that's exactly what we should do with it. And the idea was that in Warcraft 3, the Undead Scourge rolled in, and pretty much wiped everybody out, or came close to wiping everybody out. The wizards saved their city.
So they decided, okay, we need to move this to a safer location. What's safe from ground attack? Air. So they start working on a massive, powerful spell, all of them, to rip Dalaran out of the ground and teleport it all the way over to float above Northrend.
You know, the thing that's also really neat from a player perspective is Dalaran's been covered by the bubble since we launched World of Warcraft, to see what happens when that bubble pops off and see what is left, and the idea that the mages of Kirin Tor have kind of lifted the city up and actually moved it to another continent is pretty badass. Can I say that? Okay.
It's also got a really cool sewer section underneath it, and it's something that I've always regretted us not having in any of our cities. It's just like such a staple of fantasy lore and cities to have like these little sewers going under a city.
And we wanted to do something to give the city a little bit more of a layered feel, because when it came up and moved, there's a huge section of rock that's still attached to the bottom of it. And so a lot of people saw that and thought, you know, was there even a sewer under Dalaran? Because it was a magical city, and, you know, but they would have infrastructure just like any other city would. But we also thought it would be a cool place to do the things that we can't do up on the normal city streets.
Something we've seen, you know, a lot is that a lot of players like to duel while they're kind of sitting around in the city doing things like the auction house, etc. So we've built in an arena into Dalaran where players can actually go and duel each other within the city.
It's a little bit more of a fight club, a little bit of an underground type thing, and the sewer just fits perfect because it's a new thing we haven't done before, so we can have water on the ground. Basically, we're kind of thinking of it as like the wizard's drain, so they would pour alchemy potions and things like that down, and all that stuff kind of ends up down here.
How we expect players to progress is that they're going to do 5-person dungeons on their way up. When they get to maximum level, they'll probably do 5-person max level dungeons for a little while before segueing into heroic. Once they're doing heroic, they're going to be gearing up to do Naxxramas, which is our first tier of raiding. At Naxxramas, they can make a choice of going the 10-person route or the 25-person route, or if they want to, they can do both. They're on separate lockouts.
You know, more people are going to be able to experience the higher end raids now, since, you know, you can do them as a 10-man as well as a 25-man. They won't be getting as good of loot, but they'll still be getting the exact same experience as far as, you know, from a gameplay standpoint and experiencing the lore.
Something with Burning Crusade was a lot of the dungeons they were cool in and of themselves, but they didn't really tie in very closely to the outdoor world and the stories that were taking place. So we're working with the quest team a whole lot more.
We would rather you quest through a whole zone for...
Hi, I'm Jeff Chamberlain. I'm the director for the cinematic for Wrath of the Lich King. For Wrath of the Lich King, we decided to go along with a more story-driven cinematic. The reasons for that were actually a few different reasons. One is production costs. It actually costs a lot more to do a montage because there are multiple characters, multiple scenes, multiple lighting scenarios. More of a driving factor was the fact that we wanted to really tell this story with this character. Arthas is an old character from Warcraft 3, for those that are familiar with that, and we just really wanted to tell a little bit more of his story. For the Wrath of the Lich King, we decided to use Arthas' father, Taranis, as the voiceover. The reason for that is there's some old drama between the two of them. Taranis was Arthas' father, obviously, but he sent him out to do a few tasks. Arthas got corrupted in the process, came back, killed him, took over the kingdom. Using Taranis' voice was actually the idea of one of our editors here. We thought that it was a great idea because it really played off the relationship between father and son and how the son became exactly opposite what the father intended for him to. The Arthas model from Warcraft 3 was very basic. I think that was about 5 years ago. So we opened it up and took a look at it and realized that technology has improved quite a bit over time. To visualize what the new Arthas would look like, we went through a concepting phase. We would draw on top of the old version, you know, bringing out more detail in areas that needed it. For instance, the skulls on his armor, we added a ton of new detail to it. And we added layers to his armor, layers of leather and different layers of plate that weren't there previously, all the while trying to maintain that general Arthas vibe that's always been there. One of the more difficult things to do in CG is to create realistic-looking hair that moves realistically and renders realistically. We have a department specifically made for simulating hair and cloth. Generally what they'll do is they'll make a small patch of hair that represents what we're aiming for and make that work properly. And then they'll apply that to the larger model and make sure that it flows in the wind properly, renders properly. Eventually they'll put that hair into the shot and simulate it using computer calculations rather than hand animation to make it flow through the wind properly. Not only does our modeling department handle all the models, they also handle all the surfacing that occurs on the model, how light interacts with the surface, whether it's reflective, whether it's matte, whether it has a speck hit on it, or various parameters that make the character look as it does. For instance, on skin, there's a parameter called subsurface, which is basically the calculation of light bouncing through the surface rather than bouncing off of it. Another challenge with Arthas and his sword Frostmourne is the metallic nature of it. It's always a fine balance there to get it reflective enough but not overly reflective. If it's overly reflective, it will seem too CG, and if it's not reflective enough, then it ends up looking dull and stone-like. Seeing as how we're in Southern California, we don't have a lot of snow reference. As a result, we purchased 8 gallons of fake snow and pushed it around and took photos of it and filmed it just to get ideas on how it would react with light. It wasn't exactly perfect since it's not real snow. We went to places like Mammoth or Alaska and took photos and filmed reference. We then used that as a basis to create movement of snow falling from the sky, for instance, or being blown in the wind, or how it diffuses light as light passes through it. There's really no better reference than real life. We spent a lot of time on how wind affected it and how it fell, and it really changes per shot based on the mood of the shot. In the early part of the show, it's a lot calmer, and toward the end when things really pick up, we get it a lot stormier. When we started this process, we were trying to follow the format from the previous cinematics where it would show a montage. And one of those ideas that we had was to have Arthas raising this hugely epic frostworm. That really stuck with us, so we kept going back to that idea and adding to it and adding to it. And eventually we realized that that one overshadowed all the other ideas we had. So we went along that path and created a singular storyline based around this awesome dragon.
My name is Aaron Chan, and I'm the lead animator for World of Warcraft, Wrath of the Lich King. On this project, we had 2 animators full-time. It allowed each animator to stay consistent with the character and really explore what each character is thinking. We didn't use any motion capture for the characters in this project. Everything was hand animated. As for animating Arthas, we just found as we went along and explored different ideas with him, it was best if we kept his movements very, very simple and subtle and deliberate. It really helped sell that he was a character with a lot of intent and focus. To sell the Frostworm's scale and size in the cinematic, we really tried to slow her movements down a lot and keep them linear. We don't really have anything to reference from in the real world, so we looked at a lot of birds and dinosaur movies and things from real life like Komodo dragons and studied the way they walk. We knew that animating a whole undead army would be quite challenging. How we decided to tackle this problem was We started off by animating about a dozen different animations. We then duplicated these animations across a large number of undead soldiers, and we offset their animations and scaled a few keys, made some things different so that each undead character would have a little bit of their own unique personality. We brought in professional actors, and we had other animators and people in the department act out undeads cheering and turning. Ultimately, it was best if we just kept things subtle so they could read on the screen.
My name is Jin Shan. I'm the lead finisher for the World of Warcraft, the Wrath of Lich King. So I'm going to briefly talk about the finishing team, that what we do at Blizzard Cinematic Department. So in short, we're directly responsible for assemble all the assets from all different departments. For example, animations, models, effects. Our responsibility is to put all these things together, do what it takes to balance it, to make it artistically very intriguing to watch. Through lighting, through compositing, through all different techniques, and eventually becomes the final frames that we delivered to the audience. So, in terms of the effects for the dragon, we know from the beginning the effects for the dragon will be probably one of the most daunting and exciting effects that we'll ever created for the whole piece. The director and the 2D concept artist first sit down and do a lot of 2D concept work, try to mock up the look of the effects and the dragon. Then, once that's done and approved, we give that concept to the effects team, and they will basically try to reproduce that look in the 3D world, but in motion. And the effects team did all sorts of tests working with millions of particles to try to make the dragon effects looks as exciting as possible. For this cinematic, we do use a lot of matte paintings, but background stuff. The reason for that is basically due to the limited time and human resource we have, and the scale and the complexity of the whole 3D set. Practically, it's almost impossible to really build the whole set to the level of details we require here. Instead, what we do is we build a rough 3D set. We call it proxy environment models. And then we do 3D projections. It's based on the force perspective, optical illusion that human eyes have. The limitation for that is it only works from a specific camera angle. The way we are doing things here in terms of putting a shot together could be roughly break down to 3 big groups. One is the character, all the layers related with the character. That's one group. And then there will be environment, any matte paintings or 3D set pieces, and also the effects group, which include anything effects related, obviously, hairs, furs, breath, smokes, anything you can think of, particle effects, snows. Well, each of those groups usually contains many different layers. For example, the character group includes the different layers to allow us to have total control over the look of the character.
So hopefully that gives you some insight on how we do things here at Blizzard Cinematics. It's a great deal of fun and hard work to get this on the screen. We all enjoy it very much and hope that everyone enjoys watching it as well.
Well, I think the first rule of music in a game is to enhance the mood and the setting and the story, but not to annoy people and not to have it run on and on incessantly. So we've worked really hard to create a system where the music doesn't play all the time. It kind of fades in out of the bed of sound effects and ambiance of an area.
It's not going to grab your attention right away, and it's meant to sort of allow the player to form their own associations and their own relationship with the zone, the place, the experience.
It's definitely a balancing act to make sure that we don't create music that's so foreground or so demanding of attention that we take away from the quest line you're on, or kill your ability to communicate with your buddies or what have you.
There's a lot of synchronicity in the ideas we tend to have without even speaking. For instance, when we were first scoring Howling Fjord, Russell was preparing to do a recording session for some music for that, and I came out and he told me, oh, I'm going to record the Uilleann pipes, the bagpipes. And I had just come out to tell him, like, oh, I just wrote a thing for bagpipes for Howling Fjord. So there was sort of this, oh, we're on the same page. Throughout in Dragonblight, in Borean Tundra, and many other places you find the Scourge, so you'll hear quite a bit of prepared piano.
And that's where you often take the lid off the piano and play the strings directly with your fingers or with bits of wood, or you pluck them or you strike the strings. We didn't destroy any pianos in the process, but the idea was to get the sounds of harsh, cold, severe conditions and use that as a musical device.
The concepts, the lore, the character, the races, that's always the primary mode of inspiration in the games. So whatever we can find out, whatever we can see, whatever we know about a particular area is completely crucial and influences just about everything.
I always wind up visiting Evelyn and talking to her about what the backstory is for a given zone or a given race, because nothing in this game is in randomly. It all makes sense. And what's so cool is that there's always an answer, and it's usually pretty compelling, and somewhere in the thread of that story I will find something to hang my hat on musically. We took some music from the outro of War 3X and we set words to it which express his coronation ceremony. And we had it originally sung by a male tenor, and while we were recording it, we were watching the rough footage of the cinematic while it was going down. I think it hit three of us at once. What if a boy alto sang it and juxtaposed this kind of innocent voice singing about the coronation against these really strong visuals of Arthas after, a lot of bad stuff has happened. And luckily, there's a real fine boys choir where we were doing this orchestral recording. And so the next day we were able to have a young man come in and record this part, and as it turned out, he didn't play video games, but he was excited nonetheless, and he had a good time, and we gave him an autographed copy of his score that he sang to, and he was a real pro. He walked in, spent about 15 minutes learning the part, and nailed it.
The one thing I wanted to convey with the ambience is you're entering an area that's very cold. In Borean Tundra, we wanted the ambience to sound more sparse and split and further out from you. It depending on where you're at, you know, the vibe is going to change dramatically, but the way that we are able to keep them blending is constantly bringing back an evil element in each of the ambient tracks.
Unless a person is specifically attuned to listening to sounds, I don't want it to stick out. I want it to blend in seamlessly with the environment such that, you know, a person isn't running by and noticing everything that's popping out in the world, because that's incredibly distracting.
Different races have different accents, different creatures. We'll try to switch it up. We want them to sound different, you know. And then the actors bring so much, just having a variety of different actors who come in and have these fantastic voices.
Let it be finished! Let it be finished! Let it be finished!
The guy who played Arthas, he's an uber geek, like the rest of us, which is great, you know. He plays the game, he's got a level 70 druid, but, you know, he's got his guild and everything else, and he's great. He's as excited about it as the rest of us who work here are, because he knows he's going to be going in there and playing through these missions, you know, that he's doing voices for. And of course, he's a hero to all his friends.
One of the really cool things that we've been doing for Wrathgate, the new cutscene in WoW, which is also we've never done as well, is have cutscenes in World of Warcraft in general that happen while a player's experiencing part of a quest line, is we recorded a ton of people groaning and doing exertions, and all that battle chatter that you're hearing is actual Blizzard employees.
DVD and video production, what we do is we do all the trailers for the games and the collector's edition DVDs, and we also do all the presentation video for trade shows and things like that.
In our department, the journey to creating a piece in-game usually comes when we're given an assignment from the World of Warcraft development team. They'll usually come up with an idea or have a patch that's coming up, and they'll want us to exhibit some of the new cool stuff coming down the pipe.
So the team as a whole will go in, anyone assigned to this project, generally the whole team will go in and go, okay, what's cool about this?
The stories are already in-game. Everywhere you go, World of Warcraft is a living, breathing world, and at every turn you take, there's a story behind the NPC that's the lonely beggar in Stormwind Streets, or the orphan in Orgrimmar. They all have stories, and just like a filmmaker in the real world will walk out into his world and see all the stories he wants to tell, for us, it's walking into this living, breathing World of Warcraft.
My favorite is to grab the stories that aren't completely apparent to players, like Lament of the Highborn. Not everyone knew the backstory of Sylvanas. Not everybody played through the Warcraft series.
Players spend hours upon hours every day playing this character, getting attached to it. We show them a world they understand and they can empathize with. They've been involved in it as much as we have.
One of the things that's nice about video games is that it is so choreographable. The trailers are using animation that we know we have. We know we have the sets. We know what our capabilities of camera movements are. So with those parameters in the back of my head, it's easier to know how to design a shot.
My personal philosophy is keep it as close to the game as possible.
Just utilizing that and utilizing what you have rather than trying to go big and new, keep it simple.
Being an employee for Blizzard is actually really cool because it's a lot like what I'm used to. It's a lot of the acting, behind the scenes kind of stuff. Like, it's not like your normal corporation where, you come to work, you clock in, the daily doldrums, so to say. It's very, it's very personal. It's very in your face.
I think that everyone in the DVD video production department are very different, and we all bring very different skill sets to the table.
It's worked out great because we were able to get the Burning Crusade DVD out. We were able to do things like the Black Temple trailer. We were able to do things like the Zerg Reveal trailer.
We grow as the industry grows, and that's a lot of fun. And I think everything's culminated into this one point where now we're working on this project for the Wrathgate.
When we started production on the Wrathgate, and we got through a couple script revisions, I sat down with David Durand, our storyboard artist, and we just started hammering it out. He'd sit on the desk and he'd say, "What's next?" And I'd describe a shot to him, and he would just do a quick wash of pencil flying on white paper, and when it looked good, we'd put that on the stack. When it looked bad, we'd crumple it up and throw it in the trash.
One of the things that's nice about traditional storyboards, whether it be for movies, theme parks, or video games, is that using marker comps and drawing is still one of the fastest ways to get the job done. It lets you compose with the director, get an idea up on the wall quickly without having the team immersed in hours and hours of investigating what the shot will be. You can see what it's going to be on the wall.
We featured a lot of the new lighting tech, a lot of new vehicle tech. We have at one point, we have a large giant who's using an Alliance player as a weapon, and he's beating down his friends and tossing him in the back.
It's been 4 years. This is the second expansion. Where did this come from?
Most of the players play from a third-person point of view where the camera is actually hovering over their character. Well, with this in-game cinematic, it takes you down to the front lines standing right alongside the world's heroes.
Well, it's a very daunting task to be given the responsibility of creating a video with a character like Arthas, where people's impressions of Arthas are some of these cinematics that they've fallen in love with over the last few years, of Arthas walking in and slaying his father. That's what we're pitted up against, essentially, whenever Arthas opens his mouth and speaks these powerful lines that everyone wants to hear from him. But I think in the writing process, when we were going through script revisions for the Wrathgate cinematic, it was very apparent the whole time that the minds were rooted in Warcraft 3. And making the Wrathgate an in-game cutscene really allows us to push a lot of buttons that you really can only do with cinema.
We want to show the beauty that is the world that our developers have created.